Welcome to Pen and Poet. Intimate conversations and performances with poets, both page and stage, established and up and coming. A safe space where you can meet new artists, maybe gain an appreciation for the spoken and written word. This is poetry for the rest of us, the reachable, understandable, digestible poetry.
That night, Zapata washed my feet. Handlebar whiskers scratched the itch between my legs like myth.
On the days of our births, we breathe the dust of these memories, and it scours our flesh, smooths our skins, fills our lungs.
All the dead desire most is to live in our memory. All they desire most is to laugh and to dance.
Hi, Rainey Mullen here, and on the show today, Anna Martinez. Anna is a poet and a great friend of mine, and Anna, thank you so much for joining me.
Yay, Rainey, I'm so happy to be here. You don't even know. I'm so excited.
Anna, thank you. Anna is a lawyer by trade and practice, but is a published and accomplished slam and performance poet. She's held titles as the ABQ XXX Haiku Champ, Albuquerque's Chicana Slam Champ, and was part of the Rumble Room team that represented Albuquerque and Louisville in 2017 at Southern Fried, of which I was part of that team too. Such a great team. It was so much fun. Mm-hmm. And we will talk about that here in a minute. But first, this is probably also a good time, if I haven't mentioned it in the introduction, that any listeners that find explicit sexual content offensive or too sensitive a subject, you may want to skip this episode, Anna.
Especially this one.
Anna is about as explicit as it comes regarding sex. As she's primarily, not exclusively, but primarily an erotic poet. So
that's why I do it, Rainey.
So I figured, since we are all about the poetry, if we can actually start by hearing one of yours. And of course, it doesn't have to be one of your more explicit ones. Totally your choice.
I think I'm going to start with the one that brought me to you, because that was just an amazing experience that we had in Louisville, and I was just so glad that I was able to experience that with you. You know, it's so interesting to me. I love to travel, but at the same time, traveling is how you understand whether or not you're going to like somebody. And totally. As different as we thought we were, we sure loved each other on that trip. All of us. So true. Yes, we had a great time. So I'm going to do Capitan, since that is the poem that Zach said that he invited me out for, because he thought that there would not be anything like that in Louisville, and I did not hear anything like that when we were in Louisville. So yeah, I was so happy to take this poem, even though it was that last night and it was kind of rough. But I'm going to start with that one.
Excellent.
And then we'll talk a little bit, I guess, about how it came about.
Yes.
But here it goes. It's been a minute, so... And it's so laid back here. It's going to be hard for me to get the drive and rhythm of this horse that I need to get. But of course, we're not racing to any kind of 3-minute time.
No.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, so maybe I can do it well. That night, Zapata washed my feet. Handlebar whiskers scratched the itch between my legs like myth. Reflected in the moon on the mesa like tongue of silver sage, reaching as he rides and rides underneath the moon's watchful breath. Rides and rides all night, and white quicksilver strides to the end of that night of 1,500 years. Calor de aliente, respiras caliente, wings of exhale lead the way. The smell of earth and dirt disturbed into flight by those 4 legs forged in steel like hands carved from the dust that flies to the beat of the earth. This land belongs to those who work it with their hands, mi campesino, where it was law that money ruled all. You took it back, gave it back, plowed fields and acequias, planted schools and campesino credit unions, self-ruling communitarian democracy, un pueblo unido, the politic of confidence, always incites betrayal. The city is full of sidewalks, you say, and I keep falling off them. But pay no mind to that. What with 20,000 soldiers, you overthrew the capital, Capitan, not in rape and plunder, but thirst and hunger, knocking door to door, asking for food and water. Bring me that hunger, Comandante. Ese sed de injusticia que te esperan mis botas, a pie y sobre el llano te llama mi llanto. Y te dibujaré con mi canto y serás tú, Zapata, quien escucho tocándome en la mañanita. Come to me, supreme chief of the revolutionary movement of the South. Fly home like falcon, roost in my mouth. Yet remain free as we understand the battle is left at the door. Enter, and on my knees I'll remove your boots and your shame of tears. As you overthrew the Capitol, so do me now. Here, it's always been my dream, eye to eye, ojo a ojo, frente a frente. Raíces enredándose, jamás seremos vencido, never again to be defeated. The smell of earth and dirt and death disturbed into flight by our forelegs, forged in steel like hands carved from the dust that flies to the beat of the earth. As your eyes understand my fight, and your hands recover my lands as promised, a time of truth and justice. And now rest, face buried in my chest, inhaling sweat and tears from my breast, lost in my blood, hint of copper on your lips. Kiss me, and I will finally find a homeland, an aura of your crown, magic from where the others turn and run. Yet I stand ground and call, Oleme. In the smoke of your body riddled with bullets, fired from every of their weapons, their rifles until emptied. Escúchame. In the laughter of 50,000 pesos, besos del traidor, mátenlo. And then, in the footsteps of the burro that carries you home to Cuautla for half the bounty, your body displayed as proof of your non-existence. So then why'd the one have to die for you to arrive? As between the two, who is truth? As still your horse can be seen prancing, galloping, bucking, reflecting silver under the sun. Even as time for talk is done, nothing now but await your hoofbeat. You need but reach your arm for my leap, and we will raise dust from this place. Silver tongue, sage reaching, as you and I ride away.
Mm-hmm. Yay.
Yay.
And having your voice in my ears with this headphone, wow. Whole nother level. Whole nother level.
Yeah, that was for me too. I've never heard it like that before. It's intense. I started off on a microphone, so yeah, I love the mic.
Oh, goodness. Thank you. So since we started with that one, let's just dive into a little bit of the history of what you at least know about the history of the person that it's kind of about.
I don't know much, and at first I was a little bit ashamed of that. We up north particularly, we seem to, I don't know, Hispanic shame ourselves, Chicano shame ourselves. I don't know if it's because we don't speak the Castilian Spanish or whatever it is. I don't know. But a lot of that happens where I come from. And I think in part, looking at my grandmother and the way she was born in she was born in Mexico, literally. She was born here in 1907. And when New Mexico became a state, the border literally crossed over her. And as an indigenous woman, indigenous to this area, a dark-skinned woman, she already had issues in terms of finding herself in a sort of societal hierarchy, and now being an American just added a new pretty much derogatory level to that for her. So she had to adjust to that. So along the way, I have family that, for better or for worse, are very conservative by nature. And right now I'm still trying to figure them out. And I'm going off on a tangent. I know that. And I just...
By all means.
And you got to rein me back, Rainey. But the question was what I know about Zapata.
Yeah.
And what I did learn about him, I know in my mind, he's always tied into the Mexican Revolutionary Movement, along with Pancho Villa. But as this poem started coming to me, it came to me basically in the form of a painting first that a friend of mine was gifted by an artist who I'd already made a very artistic and spiritual, pretty much, connection with. I seem to channel, I guess. That's what I do when I'm writing. I know a lot of people write from outside in, and I think that that's your process. I think we've talked about that, and we kind of don't really understand the others, but that's beautiful to me because I'm a Libra and I love balance. But I tend to write from the outside in. I pick up things that are around me that are, I'll have an idea or a thought or even just a word or a picture in my mind. And then I just kind of leave my sensory antenna, I guess, open to what the world is saying about that thought, what the music, what conversations that are had around me. And I just kind of pick these things up and put them in a story. And I didn't know much about Zapata, and I was very ashamed of that. And I had the day off, and I came to my friend's house and saw her beautiful painting, and lines started coming to me. And she's a doctor of philosophy, actually, my friend Tessa.
Ooh, fancy.
Yes, and she teaches Chicana studies. And so at my age, she's younger than I am, and I was kind of ashamed to sit down at that point and admit to her I didn't know much about him. But I wanted to know who he was because his poem was coming to me, and it was running in my head. Kind of, I tried to get the rhythm like a horse, like, galloping, and because that's how this poem was coming at me. And I wanted to make sure I got it right. And so we sat down and talked about it, and this was my lesson in learning about who Zapata was. And what I understood is he was a little bit different from Pancho Villa in that it wasn't all about so much the revolution and overturning the elite, all that. It was just a matter of reclaiming lands that had been taken away. He was a farmer, first and foremost. So he was a farmer who had, in his community, his peoples had been working their lands for generations, and people with money, just like it's happening now, came in and kind of just started buying off the land, and they became subservient and unable ever to recapture ownership of their properties. So he led an uprising of basically the farm workers, and he did it without, I don't want to say that he did it without warfare, of course, because we were talking earlier in the little writing prompt that we had. I just got this idea. Peace is definitely not gentle or docile. Peace is loud and aggressive, and it's a peace train like a locomotive. And so the uprising that these peaceful people created really made some change. And for a while there, they did have a system of government that was not government. It was communal, and people bartered, and they didn't have laws, they didn't have jails, they didn't have police, and it worked really well for maybe about a generation or less. But of course, times of peace are always challenged and always tackled below the knees. So he was murdered in a traitorous act in which he was basically told that he was going to be commissioned. He was going to be honored for all the work that he had done, and he got people's properties back. And when he came into this compound, he was just ambushed, and there were soldiers at every level up on top of the buildings, from inside the buildings. And as he rode through, they just unloaded until he was gone. So what I learned about him is there is, I wanted to find that activism that does have that drive, that aggression that peace requires. And he seemed to be that symbol for me. I was looking for that in a male symbol, because in my life it's kind of hard to kind of find, I don't know. Outside my dad, outside friends like you, it's really hard, the dating scene, whatever. So, and another thing is I wrote this like a spell. I'm trying to summon up this motherfucker because I need him in my life. I need a warrior like that can handle a warrior like me. And that was basically why I wrote this poem.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question that, yeah, there's a bit of the history, but you kind of still turned it into some sort
all about me. Some sort of erotica.
Yeah. So that was...
Because, I mean, I think part of how war succeeds is by putting up walls and removing intimacies. And, I mean, if you've got a partner that you can be intimate with on every level like that, then there's nothing or nobody that can come and destroy what you've got. Because even though they turned him into Swiss cheese with their rifles when they murdered him, they just pumped so many bullets in him. His legend remains, and he's still inspiring people, and we're still writing about him and being inspired about him. And without him in my life, I don't know how I could have moved forward, because it brought me to this point where my art, with the poetry, with the Southern Fried, with you, with our slam team, and that just kind of snowballed everything else good and beautiful and poetry and art that has been happening to me in the last year or so.
And I'm glad too, because I think that was kind of where I met you. You had already kind of written that one.
Yeah, and we all kind of started together, you and Robin and I anyways.
Yeah, all about the same time.
And all in Zach's shows too.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, not just serendipitous. I don't think you're part of my spiritual journey too. That's how I feel.
And Robin and I actually knew each other online and found each other, and then I had mentioned something about, hey, I like slam. I think it's fun. I should do it. And she just messaged me and said, we should both do it next month. That's it. So, yeah.
And you've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, all three of us have.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's been a fun journey.
It really, really has. And with this poem, actually, that's not the original. The original, when it came out, because like I said, I channel, so most of it came out in Spanish. And I didn't even realize that until the day we all got together for that first rehearsal. And Zach said, this is the poem I chose you for. Let's hear it, right? And I've read that in lots of places. I've read it in Taos and Santa Fe, all over. And I get this a lot. Oh, that was so beautiful. I didn't understand what you said, but I got the tone. I got the feel.
I was one of them.
No, you were not. No, you held me to the truth, and it was awesome because it made I had fallen on the laurels of that, and I thought, oh, well, if they don't get it, that's their bad. But I was going to Louisville with this, and if I was going to take it there, it was not going to make any sense for me to have people not understanding it, up to or over half of the poem. And I did it the first time, and Zach and Rob's like, oh yeah, we felt that. Rainey looks at me like, there's a great line in the middle there about falling off sidewalks, but then you lost me again. And that I needed to hear that. Because then I had to work on, okay, let's see what happens if I translate the poem. And I translated it, verbatim, and it sucked. It was shit. Really? It was crap. I was like, no. I went like kind of just verbatim and translated it. And then I thought I'd go back and kind of artistically fit it back together, but I couldn't do that because what I realized, what was lost in the translation was the myth itself, that I didn't have to explain, but in the English language. So once I did it in English, there were so many elements to his story that in Spanish, some of the phrasing and the terminology are just so ingrained in our culture that it's understood, and all it refers to is understood. But I didn't have that. There were phrases that I had in there in Spanish that I did leave in, and that's why I left those parts in Spanish, because to me they're the magic part, they're the spell part. But what was I going to say? When I got to that part and I was trying to translate, I realized that I had to explain things. I had to explain these cultural phrases in a way that people were going to understand what I was trying to say. So it was something that I could not just direct translate. I did that, and there was no way it was going to work. And I think part of that might be in our book, because it was like the first draft that I sent Zach.
Yeah.
And then we got mistaken. But so it turned into a different poem almost. If you looked at a direct translation from the Spanish version to the one I've got now, you would think it's a whole different poem, but in a sense it's not. I mean, I had to rewrite everything to get the meaning in there that I could just refer to with a cultural phrase in Spanish. So that was interesting for me to have to work.
And that was going to be my question, if you consider them kind of as separate poems now.
I kind of do.
Really?
Because the one in Spanish is more of that, what the original intent was, like an incantation almost, because there's more repetition, there's more imagery that serves a double purpose that way in the Spanish version, in a way that you can't do in English. So I had to use up more time explaining more things, and I had to remove some of the magic and hoping to use words that would convey that magic through the story that I now had to explain and kind of narrate.
Awesome. Then I think I will ask you later to record the Spanish version, or the mostly Spanish original version, for our Patreon listeners.
Oh, that would be
so
awesome.
That they get to hear both versions.
Yeah, I love that one. And mostly what I love about it is I suck at conversational Spanish. But when it's written and it's in my poem and it's coming from that place, it makes me feel good and confident. And I mean, and of course, translating it to the page is a whole other story again, because then you have to deal with that elitism or the self-confidence issues about that. I was just an English speaker first and foremost, and I was reading and writing and orating from the time I was little. That was my puppy trick. And so once we moved here and they tried to teach me how to speak Spanish, I'm like, dude, I don't know how to do that. I got this one down. I think I'll stick with this.
Nice.
And yeah, it's a decision or an attitude that has haunted me, because that's the one thing, I mean, I've I have traumatized my children in many kind of ways, but the worst way in their minds was not passing down my language to them. And I'll always try to make up for that.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to tell you, as well as listeners, the reason why I chose you as kind of my first interviewee. One being that we're good friends and you were less likely to reject me. But
I already love you.
But also because you have a style of poetry that I don't usually gravitate towards. You know that I don't really talk about sex very often. But yours largely manages to draw me in. And I think it's that kind of melodic tone that's not quite rhyme, it's not quite sing-song, but there's some sort of working melody around it. And I noticed that you almost never read poems. It's almost like you're actually performing it no matter what. And I'm wondering where that comes from, where a lot of us who do poetry will kind of write words and then make it into a performance. It's almost like you build them simultaneously.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how it happens for me, because I think I'm a performer first. And I think, again, that comes from my mom. My mom was a singer, and my dad is a visual artist. So he does oil paints. And I mean, he started off doing portraits and being the oldest child. And the subject of a lot of his paintings, out of default, sometimes he needed a foot model or a hand model or whatever it was. And so I was always part of his art. But I can't even draw a stick figure, so I was part of it, but always from the outside looking in. And my brother, my sisters, everyone had that talent, and I didn't. And my mom was a singer, so I thought, oh, I look like my mom. I'm going to sing. Oh, hell no. Hell no. But it did give me an outlet in that I wanted to be a singer, so I started writing songs. That's where my kind of writing began. But first and most importantly, I think my mom taught me to read by the time I was 3. And it became something that that wasn't just, it was almost my chore in our house. So like my mom would be cooking and she would have me a book or a newspaper or a magazine article and tell me, read this to me while I'm working. So that's what I did. And then, friends and family could come over and like, oh, she's reading already. Oh, yeah, she can read this out of the New York Times. Watch, show them, Anna. Read that for them. So that was always my pony trick, And I thank God for that because, like, people fear public speaking more than they fear death.
It's true.
And because my mom did that for me, I don't actually fear public speaking as much as I do death. But
that's clear.
Right. So from early on, I was just a stage seeker and quite the ham. So I just started off in plays, and I think I just been an audio learner from that point. I learned that what I could do well was read out loud. So I would read to myself out loud, even if I read stories. Most of the time I didn't get the opportunity to, but when I did, I liked the sound. So I would read out loud so I could catch the rhythm of the writing. At that point, I don't think I knew I was going to be a writer. Well, I must have. By the second grade, I was claiming to be.
Wow, by the second grade. Huh?
I was I was a horror short story writer. Hey. And then in the fifth grade, they tried to turn me into a poet, and I rebelled. I did not want to be a poet. I would never be, and here I am.
So then it must have taken you a while to actually get into poetry.
It did. Because and I think I'm an audio learner too. So because of that, it's the sound and the song, like you said, it's the tone that carries me. And so what was the question again?
I don't even remember either, but I since we're kind of going down that path, I was going to ask you to do another poem, but I want to start here. Okay. You had kind of hinted on the quote-unquote traditional poetry that tends not to be as reachable for a lot of us. And that's kind of where I'm trying to take this podcast, is kind of opening eyes to, the broader range of poetry, maybe some of the more reachable, digestible poetry that folks can actually understand, and kind of maybe jump in to the shallow end first of poetry. And I know you and I have had this conversation before about the traditional poets versus performance poets, and how we both struggle to find page poets that we enjoy. So now that you've had a few months since we last chatted about that, have you actually found any page poets that you enjoy yet?
I do, but they're the same ones. And but this is what they do for me also. What it made me realize is that, yes, my writing style, the way I do it is I jot down notes and I start narrating it or orating it or whatever it is, reading it out loud. And for me, as I do that, it's the sound that fills in the meat. So for me, the written page is always the draft, and I've always treated it that way. But it's not just me. When I started off writing, I've always written the things that I write. And it came from a place that, I guess we're going to have to go there. I was 6 years old when I was molested by a very close family member who should have been protective of me. And because it was a violation in every way, but it wasn't violent. So it really fucked up my head for a long time. But what it did more importantly to me is it made me aware, and I have to be thankful again for my ability at that point. I was a reader, an avid reader. I knew stories, I knew characters, I knew storylines. So I had enough of that in me to understand that what happened to me and not because of me. I was able to separate the act and the person and say, wait a minute, you should know that this is wrong. You may not allow me to say anything right now at this moment that's going to stop you from doing what you're doing, but this will be the last time.
At 6 years old, you came to that conclusion.
Yes. At 6 years old, as it was happening, I'm thinking, wait a minute. Whoa, what the fuck? Why are you, what? I know this is wrong. Why don't you know this is wrong? Why don't you know that this is wrong when I know? So I never absorbed any of that. I never absorbed any of the guilt or the shame. And I think from that moment on, that's where I found my ability to read and write the way I do. And not only the ability, but the the absolute necessity to do it because I didn't have the words to tell anybody what was happening to me. And I needed to find out. And thankfully, although my parents were very protective about who they left me with, and of course later on they were it was really hard on them to find out that the place that they thought that I should be safest was the place where we found, that we were not safe. But what it did for me was make me step back, assess my role in it, even though I didn't blame guilt. It happened to me, so there was something I had to figure out in terms of the relations between girls and men, girls and boys, men and women. So from that moment on, I became an observer, a researcher. And although my parents didn't allow me to go anywhere, anything very strict about where we went and what we did, reading, they never, ever, 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 ever even monitored what I was reading. They allowed me access to read anything that I wanted.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. And so even though they didn't have these conversations with me, and I didn't have that communication with them, but I had access to fix and find out for myself because they didn't limit the books that I read. And of course, after I found their joy of sex and their Playboys under the mattress and hid them in the bathroom for a while where I thought no one would find them, that was a little upsetting, I'm sure. But even at that point, nobody even addressed that with me. They just kind of disappeared. So I was thankful for that because that was my salvation. I don't know that any of the other girls in my family had the way I did, sense of identity, and mostly it just came from the characters that I was already friends with in my favorite books. So that really, really helped me to take an outside looking in kind of perspective as to what had happened to me, to assess it and to just kind of, try and figure things out. Because from that point on, it was something that I had to deal with constantly. And I always thought that it was visible on me. So that was part of why I was trying to figure out how do you wash that off your psyche so other men don't recognize it.
Thank you for sharing that. And since we're on that topic, I will say that that's probably, I can guess that that's where the erotic poetry stuff comes from, the openness and non-judgmental pieces of around sex. Whereas I had a similar situation where, I found my parents' collection of pornography and it did not go that way. There was a lot of shame involved in it. So that certainly helps explain, the general openness of your poems.
And we got to remember this is the 70s and I lived literally in the shadow of the largest and oldest Catholic church in the Southwest for sure. My parents are very involved in the church. We're, in church every day during Lent, every Sunday, every Saturday for confession, and all of this. So even though I didn't get that from my parents, I almost, the silence almost worked in the same way had it not been for my access to literature. But my involvement with the church for sure kind of tried to cement that shame in me. And I don't want to say, because I want to say that while I was growing up, we had good people in my church, good people that were involved. I never had any kind of issues with priests or anything like that, nothing like that. They're very good, loving people. But at the same time, it's doctrinal,
Yeah.
So that's something that I've been trying to deal with from that point in my life. I saw a Facebook friend the other day on Facebook, give a shout out, and was on one of our poet for people that we met for Southern Fried. And he's like, I just had a woman tell me that her 6-year-old daughter was raped, and she's asking me, what do I do? He's like, what do I tell her, Wow. And I was the same age. So, the one thing that I thought to myself was most important is that this little girl understands that none of it was her fault. And that, but the message that's the most important is to the people that love this child have to allow her now the room to experiment, explore, talk, and all of those things. And that's the hard part because she is now a sexual being.
Yeah. Wow.
And she needs an outlet. She needs support. She needs someone that can talk to her and guide her through that. And we don't have the capacity, the terminology, the conditioning, the religious, whatever it is, to do that. And that's why I write the way I do, because we need to be able to talk about sex the way we talk about having heartburn, the way we talk about there's dirty dishes in the sink, the way we talk about bills need to be paid.
Oh, so true. I did not expect this to go this deep and this heavy.
Didn't
and
either. And especially, yes. Yeah, because we've had lots of discussions about this before. Yeah. And I just love that we have such similar life experiences that we build on in this friendship.
Yeah. And I have to say that in the 2 years that I've been doing this poetry stuff, is just that everybody is so not only open but accepting.
Yeah.
Very quickly accepting of all the baggage that life comes with.
And I just want to thank you for the discussions that you and I have had, because I will tell you, just like you did with the poem, you opened my eyes to some truth that I'd never looked at before, that I'd never thought about before, always just from my perspective or the female perspective, feminine perspective. And it was very eye-opening for me to have discussions like that with you in a way that I've never heard discussion from any men that I know, whether family or friends, artists, poets, anything like that. I've never had discussions with any of them the way that you and I did. And basically it was just kind of based on those connections that we made. And I guess.
Oh, yeah. You're going to make me cry.
I know, but just thank you. That was beautiful to me. I had to really rethink and relearn. And especially now in this atmosphere of all this going on, like all of these big men being taken out by this. And I'm so conflicted by it, because the nature of human sexuality is just, a lot of it is so, it truly is, or it should be, kind of animalistic almost, it's chemical. And so without having these discussions, we don't know where the lines are.
So true.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's lighten things up a bit then. Do another?
Let's do another one. Okay,
all right.
So since we're there, let me see. Which one should I do? I'm gonna do this one because it's fairly new, and it's part of me kind of dealing with that issue, right? Because from that point on, it's like almost this society doesn't allow women to be aware of and own their own sexuality. And when they do, that's not sexy anymore. So having to find, and plus, like, sex is such an important and vital part of, adult human life. Women, like, literally fucking will just dry up and die without that shit. And I ain't going out like that. So yeah, this is one of those experiences, and this is so funny. I wrote this poem, and it was about this guy that, I'd been looking at him from afar. This is probably one of the only ones that I've got that's about an older man, right? And he's so handsome and attractive and talented, and I was like, ooh. And I had this opportunity with him, and then this is what it turned into. This one's called Damn Those Black Ones. I'm trying to get this one memorized. I thought I had it, but it's me just trying to work out those issues. And it's not just him, but it's me too. And a lot of it is just my own self-confidence issues. But I'm going to be reading this one. It was both sheer and blind terror that night as he made his way to turn on the light so that she could find them on his dark sheet. No blanket to hide between, underneath, backside, stretch marks, cellulite. He might not invite her back if he sees her. Cottage cheese, so she must act fast as she wipes with the blue gas station paper towel he hands from his stack, so her hands can scramble across the sheet, the bed, drop to her knees, the floor, the foot of the bed, distracted by beer and the smell of head on her lips. Not similar, but same, though this one is grayed, only his name is changed, and her mind shifts back down to the bulge of her hips, shacked up and hid away for so many years and kids, and she cannot expose them here to his eyes the way she just had to the wild blind of his drum-playing hands, as they'd ripped at, stripped at, and spanked at her ass, and now her fumbling hands race so that he does not see that they are panties, not lace, not string, but she can't see a fucking thing, and damn those black ones she wears on nights that she thinks she stands a chance. And she chokes back a laugh that they're practically new, and she wishes she knew what to do, or at least the rules on leaving him behind, or what he might think on finding them later on tonight or in the AM, bright and early, 6 o'clock, I think he'd said, as he'd tossed her out of his bed, killing her plan to leave before that, but just glad that he makes way for it and turns on the bathroom light instead, giving her extra time, yet still not enough light, and she screams in her head, still searching the bed, to drown the sound of him rinsing and gargling her out of his mouth, swishing she can smell with blue Listerine as he spits her over and over in the sink. As over and over she runs her hands through the bed, now distracted again, desperate too to rinse him the fuck away. She eyes the Killian's Red she'd left on the stand as he had pulled her to bed. She had a habit of not finishing that last warm sip, but wishes she could just swish with it here, but really knowing bottle-bottom beer is so similar and same in its brine and its shame. And anyway, he shuts off the water. She figures in her head the number of seconds before he turns and finds her still bent over the bed, still searching, still naked, awaiting his light. And in silhouette, he heads her way, soft, clean. She wonders how many like her he's seen her as of late, how many have seen him this way, and she's still searching the motherfucking bed with absolutely no time left as he brushes by to turn on the bedroom light. As she grabs fast, even as she wonders how it's gonna feel, she jumps bare-assed into her pants, and that left foot, right foot pull him up, wriggle and zipper pulling dance just as he flips on the switch, and voila, there they are, tucked in the molded pocket her ass had left in his futon mattress bed, as she quickly nabs and shoves them in her own pocket before he sees her to the door without a word said about calling again, and shuts off the porch light before her key even hits the driver's side door. She wonders, fuck, how many more? Her mind engages nothing but broken white lines that guide her to her own front door, 3 o'clock in the morn, knocking, fishing, fumbling forgotten keys, turns her pocket and sees in the dark where she stands nothing but tumbling blue paper towel and black panties in hand. I forgot about that. Yeah, that was a letdown. I thought he was hot. Son of a gun. He actually made it into the end of my Blue Chevy pickup poem, too. He was, she even remembers even the most recent Hyundai Gray. Didn't make the cut, but so what? That's him. Hyundai Gray. Didn't make the fucking cut.
Hilarious.
But he made a poem.
You made a poem.
And you know what? I bet you if I read that poem and he were in the audience front and center, he would come and hug me and tell me how beautiful my poem was and never fucking even recognize himself in that fucking poem.
Wow.
I know that. But anyway.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, goodness. Where to now?
You know, anywhere you want.
Well, how about this? We're kind of running a little
short on time.
Yeah.
You knew that was going to happen with me.
Yeah, I did. That makes it a lot easier for me. I don't have to do any talking. But I want to try to end each episode with the poems that we wrote today.
Wow.
So not only are we getting a little bit of the performance poet, but also a little bit of traditional poetry from a performance poet. Yeah. So the poems that we wrote before we hit the record button is called a Fibonacci poem, and it's a 6-line poem based on syllables. So the first 2 lines are 1 syllable apiece, the third line being 2 syllables, fourth being 3, then 5, then 8. And that's pretty much the only parameters for the poem. And so at that point, why don't you share yours, Anna?
I will, and I kind of touched on it earlier just because this thought was in my head. But here it goes. But peace is not submissive, weak, quiet, or shy. Peace is rebellion, anarchy.
Yes. Love it. And it ties in with that Capitan.
Yes.
Capitan one very well.
Yes.
And mine was based on the fall, since I happened to be staring out the window when we were writing it, and it's all fall out there. Even though it's December in Albuquerque, it's still only fall. So mine goes, sometimes fall has a way of coming far too fast, but leaves taking all that you love.
Wow.
Yay.
I love that one.
Awesome. And that's, I guess, where we will leave it. Anna, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't hit on?
I did, but you have, I think, 10 other poets.
No.
interview.
If you've got something, by all means.
No, I'm just kidding you.
All right.
You know I can go on forever.
Yes.
But thank you so much for having me.
Thank
This
you,
is awesome.
Anna. Thank you. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot.
I want to thank Ana Martinez again for talking with me today, but also for being my very first guest. Ana really is a special person. She blurs the line between erotic poetry and the more sensual poem. Then again, she does have those few poems that jump the fence and go straight into the erotic. We also totally spaced it and never talked about some of the things that we had intended to. Our time at Southern Fried, for one. If you haven't been to Southern Fried's Poetry Slam, I cannot stress enough that you should. I've been to poetry events in the past, including a number of slam events. None are as welcoming, as embracing, or as emotional. You really do become family right out the gate. There was this huge assembly on day one. All the poets had to get together in a big auditorium, and we felt very out of place. Then the host asked for a show of hands of those who were first-timers. We raised ours along with about a dozen other poets, and boom. Everyone came up to you, gave you huge, genuine hugs, and introduced themselves. It really is a place of belonging. Also, you can find Ana Martinez's poetry in the Rumble Room Volume 1 on Amazon. It has several of Anna's poems, as well as mine, Robin Reynolds, and Zachary Kluckman, all part of the Rumble Room team that went to Southern Fried this year, and some of our group pieces that we made together. Anna is also in talks to have her first independent book of poetry early next year, so be on the lookout for that. If you are a poet and want to be a guest, you can email me at rainy.mullen@gmail.com. That's rene.mullen@gmail.com, or find me on Facebook as well. Lastly, if you like this show and feel this is an important platform for poets, or you just enjoy learning about new understandable poetry, consider heading over to my Patreon page, Pen and Poet, and becoming a monthly donor. This is not a cheap endeavor, but I'm committed to creating a space for poets to share their art and their story. And everyone who jumps on board with a monthly donation that can range anywhere from $1 a month all the way up will receive a recording of Ana Martinez's original Capitan poem that we talked about today. And thank you, everyone. Stay safe.